The hardest thing about being hungry is learning how to smile while nobody notices. By the time I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, it was almost midnight. My legs felt heavier than they should have. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and laundry detergent. Somewhere behind a closed door, a television played softly. The rest of the building was asleep. I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside. Darkness greeted me like an old friend. The place was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen that barely deserved the name. I flipped on the light above the sink and set my bag down. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. That sound always made me hopeful for a second. Hopeful and foolish. I crossed the room and opened the door. A half-empty carton of milk. A bottle of water. 2 eggs. Nothing else. The cold air brushed against my face before I slowly closed the door again. I stood there for a moment, staring at the white surface as if food might magically appear if I waited long enough. It never did. I checked my phone. $37.14 remained in my account. Rent was due in 4 days. The electric bill was due in 6. My second job paid on Friday. Today was Tuesday. I did the math again even though I already knew the answer. There was no room for groceries. Not this week. Maybe next week. I had been saying that for months. I filled a glass with water and drank it slowly. Then another. Water helps sometimes. Not much. Just enough to quiet the ache for an hour or 2. I changed out of my work clothes and sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress creaked beneath me. Outside the window, Boston shimmered beneath distant streetlights. People were still moving through the city. Couples leaving restaurants. Friends laughing on sidewalks. Delivery drivers finishing late shifts. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. I wondered what it felt like to come home without calculating every dollar. My phone buzzed. A message from my younger brother appeared on the screen. Thank you for the transfer. Mom's medication is covered this month. I smiled immediately. That was why the refrigerator was empty. Why my savings never grew. Why I worked mornings at a diner and evenings at a grocery store. Mom needed help. My brother was doing his best. Family was family. Some things were not negotiable. I typed back that everything was fine. Then I stared at the message after sending it. Everything was not fine. But I could not remember the last time I admitted that out loud. The apartment felt colder as the night deepened. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and opened a library book I had borrowed weeks earlier. Reading helped. Stories were cheaper than therapy and lasted longer than dinner. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Eventually the words began to blur together. Hunger does that. It steals focus first. Then energy. Then sleep. I turned off the lamp and lay back against the pillow. The room disappeared into darkness. My stomach tightened again. I ignored it. I was getting good at that. Before closing my eyes, I whispered the same promise I made every night. Tomorrow will be better. Sometimes I believed it. Sometimes I did not. Either way, morning always came. What I did not know was that somewhere across the city, a man who had everything was about to discover that a woman who never complained had been going to bed hungry for far longer than anyone realized. People notice expensive watches. They notice luxury cars. They notice power. What they almost never notice is hunger. The next morning started at 5:30. My alarm sounded long before sunrise. For a few seconds I stayed beneath the blanket, listening to the wind tapping softly against the apartment window. Then reality returned. Work. Bills. Responsibilities. I pushed myself out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator looked exactly the same. 2 eggs. Milk. Water. I opened the cabinet above the sink. Half a sleeve of crackers remained. Breakfast. I ate 3 crackers, drank a glass of water, and convinced myself that was enough. By 6:15 I was walking toward the diner where I worked the morning shift. The city was still waking up. Streetlights glowed against the fading darkness. Delivery trucks rolled through quiet intersections. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Boston always looked beautiful before the crowds arrived. Sometimes I imagined it was the city's way of apologizing for everything that came after. The diner sat on a busy corner near the financial district. Nothing fancy. Red booths. Old coffee machines. Regular customers who ordered the same thing every morning. I tied on my apron and got to work. By 7 o'clock the rush had started. Coffee cups filled tables. Orders piled up. Conversations blended into a constant background hum. I smiled. Took orders. Delivered plates. Refilled drinks. Most customers never noticed how tired I felt. That was fine. They were not supposed to. Around 8:30, a businessman sitting alone near the front window caught my attention. Not because of what he wore. Because of what he did not do. Most people looked at phones while waiting for food. He watched people instead. Calmly. Quietly. As though studying the room. When I approached his table, he closed the menu. "Good morning," I said. "Can I get you something?" His eyes lifted toward mine. Green. Sharp. Observant. "Coffee," he said. "Black." His voice was controlled. Confident. Familiar somehow. I poured the coffee and returned to serving other customers. Yet every now and then I noticed him still sitting there. Watching the room. Watching people. Not in a strange way. More like someone searching for answers to questions nobody else knew existed. 2 hours later, the rush finally slowed. I carried a tray of leftover pastries toward the kitchen. Unsold items were usually thrown away at the end of the shift. Waste always bothered me. Before I reached the back room, I quietly slipped a wrapped muffin into my bag. Not stealing. The manager allowed employees to take leftovers. Sometimes that muffin became dinner. Sometimes it became breakfast the next day. Sometimes both. I thought nobody saw. I was wrong. From across the room, Vincent Romano noticed everything. The way I skipped breakfast during my break. The way I drank water instead of ordering food. The way I carefully saved the leftover muffin as though it mattered more than it should. Most people would not have paid attention. Vincent did. Something about the small act bothered him. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was not. Felt practiced. Routine. Familiar. The kind of behavior that only develops after a long time. He left cash on the table and stood to leave. Then his eyes drifted toward my bag resting near the counter. Toward the single wrapped muffin inside. A strange feeling settled in his chest. One he could not quite explain. As he stepped outside into the cold Boston morning, he found himself looking back through the diner window. I was laughing with a customer, smiling like everything was fine. And for the first time, Vincent wondered what happened after that smile disappeared. The strongest people are often the ones carrying burdens nobody can see. By the end of my shift at the diner, my feet ached and my stomach felt hollow again. The muffin was still in my bag. I had planned to eat it during lunch. Then my phone rang. It was my brother. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something had happened. "Mom's prescription increased," he said quietly. "The doctor says she needs it." I closed my eyes. Another expense. Another problem. Another decision that was not really a decision at all. How much? He told me. I did the math immediately. The answer was simple. The muffin would stay in my bag. Lunch would become water again. "I will send something tonight," I said. "Olivia, you do not have to keep doing this alone." I smiled even though he could not see it. "We are family." After the call ended, I sat alone in the employee break room for a few minutes. The vending machine hummed softly beside me. A sandwich sat behind the glass for $6.25. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I stood up and walked away. $6.25 could become part of a prescription, part of a utility bill, part of next month's rent. Hunger was temporary. Debt lasted longer. Across the city, Vincent Romano sat inside a conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. Executives discussed investments. Financial reports covered the table. Millions of dollars moved through conversations as casually as weather forecasts. Normally Vincent listened carefully. Today he found himself distracted. A single image kept returning to his mind. A young woman placing a leftover muffin into her bag as though it mattered. It should not have interested him. Yet it did. "You are unusually quiet," one of his advisors observed. Vincent glanced toward the window. "Am I? Something is on your mind." Vincent did not answer immediately. Instead he remembered the way Olivia smiled at customers. The way she laughed. The way she seemed genuinely happy helping strangers. None of it matched the look he had briefly seen when she thought nobody was paying attention. There had been exhaustion there. Something deeper too. Find out more about her, Vincent said finally. The advisor raised an eyebrow. Business related? Vincent's gaze remained fixed on the harbor. Not exactly. Meanwhile, my second shift began at a neighborhood grocery store. I stocked shelves, helped customers find products, carried boxes from storage rooms. The hours passed slowly. Around 9:30 that evening, an elderly customer struggled with several grocery bags near the entrance. Without thinking, I offered to help her carry them to her car. She thanked me 3 times before I returned inside. Small things mattered. They always had. By the time I finally reached my apartment, it was nearly 11. The city had grown quiet. My body felt exhausted. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The refrigerator greeted me with the same lonely hum. The muffin remained untouched in my bag. I placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow's breakfast. Maybe tomorrow's lunch too. Then I opened my banking app and transferred money to my brother. When the confirmation appeared, my balance dropped lower than I wanted to see. Much lower. I locked my phone and looked away. Some numbers hurt more when you stared at them. Across Boston, a report landed on Vincent Romano's desk. It contained employment records, rent history, medical expenses connected to Olivia's family. Nothing dramatic. Nothing scandalous. Just pages filled with sacrifice. Vincent read every line. Then he read them again. And somewhere between the numbers and the receipts, he began to understand that the woman with the easy smile was quietly giving away pieces of her own life to keep someone else afloat. Some discoveries change what you know. Others change how you see the world. The following Thursday began like every other exhausting day. I worked the morning shift at the diner, smiled through conversations, refilled coffee cups, and pretended the headache behind my eyes was nothing serious. By noon, the room seemed slightly brighter than usual. Not brighter in a good way. Brighter in the way lights look when your body is asking for something you have been denying it for too long. I ignored it. There were customers waiting. Bills waiting. Responsibilities waiting. Hunger could wait too. It always did. Around 1 o'clock, an elderly man entered the diner and sat alone near the back. He looked familiar. Not because I knew him. Because he reminded me of someone who had spent a lifetime carrying burdens without complaining. When I brought his meal, he frowned at the menu. "I forgot my wallet," he said quietly. Embarrassment colored his face. "I am sorry. I will leave and come back." For a moment I looked at the plate, then at him. Then I made a decision. "Do not worry about it." He blinked. "Miss, I cannot let you pay for my lunch. It is only lunch." "Still." I smiled. "Then help someone else someday." His eyes softened. He thanked me twice before beginning to eat. The meal cost almost the same as what I had planned to spend on dinner that night. Yet somehow I did not regret it. Not even a little. Across the city, Vincent Romano was reviewing reports when his phone vibrated. One of his people had been keeping an eye on Olivia's situation at his request. Nothing invasive. Nothing inappropriate. Just enough to understand what kind of life she was really living. The update was brief. Olivia had paid for a stranger's meal. Vincent stared at the message longer than necessary. Then he leaned back in his chair. The report sitting open beside him already told a painful story. 2 jobs. Medical expenses. Late nights. Empty savings. Yet somehow she was still giving away money she could not afford to lose. Most people became harder when life became difficult. Olivia seemed to be doing the opposite. Later that evening, rain began. Falling over Boston. Not a storm. Just a cold, steady drizzle that soaked sidewalks and darkened the streets. My shift at the grocery store ended at 9. I felt tired enough to sleep for a week. The headache had never disappeared. As I walked toward the bus stop, I passed a small convenience store glowing beneath fluorescent lights. Through the window I saw hot soup rotating beneath a warming lamp. For one dangerous moment I stopped walking. The scent drifted through the doorway every time customers entered. My stomach tightened immediately. The soup cost less than $5. $5. Not much. Yet I knew exactly where that $5 belonged. I kept walking. The rain followed me all the way to the bus stop. 10 minutes later, While waiting beneath the shelter, the world tilted unexpectedly. Streetlights blurred. Sounds became distant. I reached for the bench beside me. My hand missed. The next thing I knew, someone was asking if I was okay. Embarrassed, I forced a smile and assured them I was simply tired. Eventually the feeling passed. The bus arrived. Life continued. But several blocks away, inside a black SUV stopped at a traffic light, Vincent received another call. This one was different. And by the time the conversation ended, the concern he had been quietly carrying was beginning to turn into something much deeper. Sometimes the truth is not hidden. Sometimes nobody is looking closely enough to see it. Vincent Romano ended the call and stared through the rain-streaked window of the SUV. The report he had received was simple. Olivia Parker had nearly collapsed at a bus stop after another 14-hour day. The explanation was listed as exhaustion. Vincent knew it was more than that. He had spent his entire life reading people, understanding risk, finding patterns others missed. And lately, every path seemed to lead back to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Olivia was sacrificing far more than anyone realized. The following morning, another folder arrived on his desk. This one was thicker. Medical invoices, employment records, bank statements obtained through perfectly legal channels available to his financial advisors. Vincent read silently. The room remained quiet except for the distant hum of the city below. Every page revealed another compromise, another sacrifice, another decision where Olivia had chosen someone else's needs before her own. Rent, utilities, prescription costs, transfers to family. There was almost nothing left after necessities. No vacations, no entertainment, no luxury purchases, no unnecessary spending, just survival. Then Vincent reached the grocery records. He stopped reading. For several seconds he simply stared at the numbers. The purchases were remarkably consistent. Too consistent. Milk, eggs, bread when available, occasional fruit, almost no complete meals, almost no protein, almost no evidence of regular dinners. The realization settled heavily into the room. He checked the dates again, then again. Weeks became months. Months became a pattern. Painful one. Olivia was not skipping meals occasionally. She was living that way. Every day. Every week. Every month. Vincent leaned back slowly. Outside the glass walls of his office, Boston moved through another busy morning. Inside, everything felt strangely still. He thought about the diner, the muffin, the water, the smile she wore so effortlessly. He thought about the elderly man whose lunch she had purchased despite having almost nothing herself. Most people protected what little they had. Olivia kept giving hers away. The realization disturbed him more than he expected. Not because she was struggling. Thousands of people struggled. What unsettled him was the quiet dignity with which she endured it. No complaints. No requests for help. No public display of hardship. She simply carried it alone. Meanwhile, I knew none of this. Friday arrived with cold sunshine and another endless schedule. The diner in the morning. The grocery store in the evening. Between shifts, I stopped at a pharmacy to pick up medication for my mother. The pharmacist greeted me by name. That happened when you visited often enough. Tell her we are thinking about her, she said warmly. Promised I would. Then I walked outside holding a small paper bag that cost more than I wanted to think about. The wind carried the scent of food from nearby. Restaurants. Fresh pizza. Roasted chicken. Warm bread. My stomach reacted immediately. I ignored it and kept walking. Hunger had become background noise. Like traffic. Like rain. Like the sound of an old refrigerator humming in the dark. You notice it at first. Then eventually it becomes part of life. That evening, after finishing my second shift, I returned home and opened the refrigerator. The same familiar emptiness greeted me. Few basics. Nothing more. I poured a glass of water and stood beside the sink looking out the window. Somewhere across the city, lights glowed inside expensive apartments and crowded restaurants. People were eating dinner, celebrating birthdays, meeting friends, living ordinary lives. I smiled softly and took another drink of water. Tomorrow would be better. It had to be. But at that exact moment, in a quiet office overlooking Boston Harbor, Vincent Romano closed Olivia's file and made a decision. For the first time since learning the truth, he stopped asking what was happening to her and started asking what he could do about it. Sometimes help arrives so quietly that it feels like a coincidence. Saturday morning began with confusion. For the first time in months, I woke up without immediately calculating what I could not afford. Not because anything had changed. At least that was what I thought. I dressed quickly and headed downstairs to check the mail before work. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint. A stack of advertisements waited inside my mailbox. So did something unexpected. An envelope from the electric company. My stomach tightened instantly. Another bill. Another problem. I opened it while standing beside the mailboxes. Then I frowned. The balance showed $0 due. I read the page again. Then a third time. There had to be a mistake. I knew exactly how much remained on that account. Yet the statement clearly showed payment received in full. I looked around the empty lobby as though someone might explain it. Nobody did. By the time I reached the diner, I had convinced myself it was an administrative error that would eventually correct itself. Life was never generous enough to create surprises like that. The lunch rush arrived quickly. Customers filled tables. Coffee machines hissed. Plates moved continuously between kitchen and dining room. For a few hours I managed to forget about the strange letter. Then another surprise arrived. "Olivia," my manager called from the office. "Can you come here for a second?" My first thought was that something was wrong. My second thought was that something had broken. Neither turned out to be true. When I stepped into the office, my manager handed me a piece of paper. "Someone recommended you for a hospitality training program." I blinked. "Me? Fully funded?" He smiled. "Apparently they reviewed customer feedback. Your name came up repeatedly." I stared at the application packet. The program offered management certification, better positions, better income, better opportunities. Things people like me usually spent years trying to reach. "Who recommended me?" I asked. My manager shrugged.
"Anonymous sponsor."
Courtesy. The word followed me through the rest of the day. Across the city, Vincent Romano stood beside the window of his office. His assistant reviewed several updates. The utility account had been cleared through a charitable foundation. The training program had accepted Olivia's application. Arrangements had been carefully structured to avoid drawing attention. Vincent listened quietly. "She cannot know," he said. "Understood." Vincent nodded once. Helping was easy. Remaining invisible required effort. Yet something told him Olivia would reject charity if she recognized it as charity. This was not about rescuing her. It was about removing obstacles she should never have faced alone. Later that evening, I stopped by a neighborhood grocery store after work. The refrigerator at home was nearly empty again. I carried a small basket through the aisles, calculating prices as I walked. Bread, milk, eggs, maybe fruit if the total stayed low enough. Then I noticed a store employee approaching me. "Excuse me, Miss Parker?" I turned. "Yes." He smiled. "There is a community assistance program running this month. Your name was selected through a local outreach partnership." Before I could respond, he handed me a voucher. I looked down. The amount printed on it exceeded what I normally spent on groceries in weeks. There must be a mistake. "No mistake." He smiled again. "Congratulations." For several seconds I simply stood there holding the voucher. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed brighter than usual. The shelves looked sharper. The world felt strangely unreal. That night, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I returned home carrying bags filled with actual food. Fresh vegetables, chicken, fruit, bread. Things that belonged in a refrigerator. Things that belonged in a normal life. Standing alone in the kitchen, I slowly placed everything onto the shelves. The refrigerator no longer looked empty. Neither did the cabinets. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. I could not explain why. Across Boston, Vincent received confirmation that the groceries had been delivered indirectly through the program he created. He closed the message and looked toward the city lights outside. Somewhere out there, a woman who had spent months pretending she was fine was finally eating dinner. But neither of them realized that the biggest question was still waiting to be answered. How long could a miracle remain anonymous before someone started searching for the person behind it? People can ignore a blessing once. They rarely ignore it twice. 2 weeks passed, and life began changing in ways I could no longer explain away. The training program started on Monday evenings. My electric bill remained paid. The grocery voucher led to another community support opportunity. Every time one problem disappeared, another door seemed to open. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt curious, maybe even suspicious. Good things rarely arrived in groups. Not in my experience. One chilly October afternoon, I sat alone in a small coffee shop between shifts, reviewing notes from the management course. Outside, leaves drifted across the sidewalk in shades of gold and red. Inside, the smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the room. For the first time in months, I had enough energy to focus on something beyond survival. That should have been enough. Yet one question continued following me everywhere. Why? Why me? I opened my notebook and started listing every strange thing that had happened. The paid utility bill, the anonymous recommendation, the grocery assistance program, the timing, the pattern. None of it felt random anymore. Someone was helping me. I just did not know who. Across the city, Vincent Romano sat in a private conference room reviewing quarterly reports. Numbers filled the screen. Investments, properties, business forecasts. Normally, he enjoyed solving complicated problems. Lately, one particular problem occupied far more of his attention than it should have. She accepted the training opportunity. His assistant informed him. Vincent nodded. Good. Her attendance has been perfect. A faint smile appeared. That did not surprise him. Olivia treated every opportunity like something valuable because she understood what it cost to lose one. The assistant hesitated. There is something else. Vincent looked up. What? She has started asking questions. The smile disappeared immediately. Meanwhile, I continued searching for answers. The grocery store manager knew nothing. The diner manager only repeated what he had already told me.
Anonymous sponsor.
Anonymous recommendation. Anonymous support. Everywhere I turned, the trail disappeared. Then something unexpected happened. On Thursday morning, Vincent Romano walked into the diner again. I recognized him immediately. The quiet businessman with the sharp green eyes. He chose the same table near the window. The same black coffee. The same calm expression. Yet this time I paid closer attention. Good morning, I said as I placed the coffee in front of him. Good morning. His voice remained steady. How is the management program? The question stopped me cold. Only for a second, but it was enough. It is going well, I answered carefully. How did you know about that? Vincent lifted the coffee cup. Small communities talk. A reasonable answer. Too reasonable. Something about it bothered me. Throughout the morning, I found myself glancing toward his table more often than necessary. He noticed details, remembered conversations, asked thoughtful questions, yet revealed almost nothing about himself. By the time he left, the uneasy feeling had grown stronger. That evening I reviewed my list again. Then I added a new name at the bottom.
Vincent Romano.
I stared at the words longer than I intended. It sounded ridiculous. Why would a wealthy businessman care about someone like me? Why would he invest time, money, or effort into a stranger's life? The theory made no sense. Yet neither did the growing number of coincidences surrounding him. Across Boston Harbor, Vincent stood alone beside the window of his office, watching city lights shimmer across dark water. For the first time since deciding to help Olivia, uncertainty entered his thoughts. Because sooner or later, every secret reaches a moment when it can no longer stay hidden. And somewhere deep down, both of them were moving toward that moment much faster than either realized. The truth has a strange habit of appearing when you stop looking for it. 3 days after adding Vincent Romano's name to my list of possibilities, I finally found something I was never supposed to see. It happened on an ordinary Monday afternoon. The diner was quiet between lunch and dinner. Rain tapped softly against the windows while I wiped tables and prepared for the evening rush. My manager stepped out briefly to handle a delivery, leaving me alone near the front counter. That was when the fax machine printed several pages by mistake. Normally I would have ignored them. Instead, one name caught my attention immediately. The hospitality training program. My training program. Curious, I glanced at the first page before placing it aside. Then I froze. A foundation name appeared near the top. The same foundation listed on the grocery assistance paperwork. The same foundation connected to the paid utility account. My pulse quickened. 3 separate programs. 1 organization. For the first time, the puzzle pieces began fitting together. Later that evening, after finishing work, I sat in my apartment surrounded by paperwork spread across the kitchen table. Utility statements, program documents, grocery records, training materials. Every page pointed toward the same charitable network. Every path eventually led toward a single group of investors and donors. One name appeared repeatedly.
Romano Holdings.
I stared at the words for a long time. The refrigerator hummed quietly beside me. Rain continued falling outside. Somewhere deep down, I already knew the answer before I admitted it. The next morning, Vincent entered the diner as usual. Same table. Same coffee. Same calm expression. But this time I was ready. I carried the coffee to his table and set it down carefully. He thanked me with a polite nod. Then I sat across from him. For the first time since we met, surprise crossed his face. Olivia. We need to talk. The silence that followed felt unusually heavy. Around us, the diner continued operating normally. Customers chatted. Plates moved between tables. Coffee brewed behind the counter. Yet none of it seemed to matter. Vincent studied me quietly. What would you like to talk about? I placed several folded papers on the table between us. His eyes moved downward, then back to mine. He understood immediately. The realization appeared so briefly most people would have missed it. I did not. It was you. Not a question. A statement. Vincent remained silent. The utility bill. Silence. The groceries. Silence. The training program. Finally, he exhaled softly. Yes. One simple word.
No excuses. No elaborate explanations.
Just honesty. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt overwhelmed. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Vincent looked out the rain-covered window. For several moments he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. Because I noticed. I frowned. Noticed what? His gaze returned to me. The answer carried no pity. No sympathy. Only truth. You were carrying everything alone. The words hit harder than I expected. Vincent continued. Most people saw a woman smiling at customers. His voice remained calm. I saw someone skipping meals so her family could eat. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. He had noticed. Not just the struggles. The sacrifices. The things I worked hardest to hide. You investigated me. I did. The honesty startled me again. Vincent looked down briefly before continuing. At first I wanted to understand why the smile never matched the exhaustion. The rain outside intensified. Water streamed down the glass. Neither of us looked away. Then I learned the truth. His expression softened slightly. And after that, doing nothing stopped feeling possible. For several seconds I could not speak. Because deep down the hardest part was not discovering who had changed my life. The hardest part was realizing someone had cared enough to notice that I was struggling long before I admitted it to myself. The people who change your life are rarely the ones you expect. They are the ones who see you when the rest of the world looks away. For a long moment, neither Vincent nor I spoke. Rain continued tapping against the diner windows. Customers came and went. Coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. Life moved forward around us as though nothing important was happening. Yet everything had changed. I looked down at the papers resting between us. Utility bills. Program documents. Pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. Then I looked back at Vincent. Why me? I asked quietly. He smiled faintly. Not because the question amused him. Because he had probably asked himself the same thing many times. The honest answer? I nodded. Vincent leaned back slightly. At first, I noticed a woman carrying a muffin home like it was something valuable. Despite everything, I almost laughed. That is what started this. Partly. His eyes softened. Then I noticed you never ordered food during your breaks. The memory made me look away. Then I learned about your mother. Your brother. The extra shifts. He paused. The more I learned, the less sense it made. What did not make sense? Vincent glanced toward the rain-covered street. Most people become angry when life treats them unfairly. His voice remained calm. You became kinder. The word settled somewhere deep inside me. I had spent so much time worrying about what I lacked that I never considered what someone else might see. I was just doing what needed to be done. Exactly. His answer came immediately. You thought sacrifice was normal. For several seconds I could not find a response. Because part of me knew he was right. Months of skipped dinners, endless workdays, constant financial stress. None of it had felt heroic. It had simply felt necessary. Vincent studied me carefully. Do you know what bothered me the most? I shook my head. You never asked anyone for help. The truth of it stung. Not because it was unfair. Because it was accurate. I had become so used to surviving alone that asking for support felt impossible. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Longer than either of us intended. Somewhere between the questions and answers, I learned something unexpected about Vincent too. Years earlier, his own family had struggled through difficult seasons. Not identical to mine, but close enough for him to recognize the signs. Close enough to understand the difference between temporary hardship and quiet desperation. By the time I returned home that evening, the rain had stopped. The city streets glistened beneath streetlights. I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. Instinctively, I opened the door. This time it was full. Not overflowing. Not extravagant. Simply normal. Healthy food. Real meals. Possibilities. For a moment I stood there smiling. Weeks earlier, that simple sight would have felt impossible. Months later, life looked different again. The management program led to a promotion. The promotion led to stability. Medical support became easier to manage. My family no longer lived from crisis to crisis. But the greatest change had nothing to do with money. It came from knowing that someone had cared enough to notice what everyone else missed. One autumn afternoon, Vincent and I stood together at the opening of a new community food initiative funded through the same foundation that had quietly changed my life. Families filled the building. Volunteers stocked shelves. Children laughed in nearby hallways. Above the entrance hung a simple message. No one sleeps hungry tonight. I looked around the room and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Vincent stood beside me, watching families receive help with the same quiet expression he always carried. You know, I said softly, you never really saved me. He raised an eyebrow. No. I smiled. You reminded me that being seen matters. For the first time that day, his smile reached his eyes. Around us, conversations filled the room. Hope filled it too. And standing there among people whose lives were changing, I finally understood something important. Hunger does not always begin with an empty stomach. Sometimes it begins with believing nobody notices your struggle. And sometimes the greatest gift is discovering that someone did.